But let's get into our conversation for the hour now. As we'd said before, it's our pleasure to host the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the State of Palestine. Her name is Dr. Varsen Aghabekian, and she's here with us. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for hosting me.
It's a pleasure. Welcome to the show. Usually we have a quote with our third member. Her name is Janet, but she's away today. So today, no quotes, just straight into the conversation.
Into the conversation.
I'll start with asking you to give us a history of the State of Palestine for those who may not be aware.
Well, historic Palestine was divided in 1947, and one state was created, Israel, and today we're trying to materialize the second state. Today, the State of Palestine has been recognized by 160 countries worldwide, and we are on the course of materializing that state on the ground. And we wish that the rest of the countries that have not recognized yet to come forward and recognize.
Let me just begin maybe asking for a little bit more detail for some of our viewers and listeners who may not understand how the creation of Israel happened in 1945, 1947. What boundaries existed before, what boundaries exist now?
Well, the Balfour Declaration of 1917 promised a land for the Jews. And that land was designated in historic Palestine. And the Israelis, the Zionists, have worked diligently on creating that land with the support of several countries at the time. That culminated in the division of historic Palestine. That land of historic Palestine was part of, the Arab land. Today, it is 78% of that land is the State of Israel. And what the Palestinians, who I represent, are asking for is to materialize their state on the 22% of historic Palestine. Only 22% of historic Palestine.
So what is the current state of that mass of land, the 22%? What is it? So only 160 countries recognize it as a state of Palestine. But what is it exactly?
It has its borders. The borders are the 1967 borders. When Israel occupied the rest of historic Palestine, they occupied the 22%. So what we want is to materialize our state as recognized by the UN and the 160 countries is on the 22% of historic Palestine. And that piece of land has its leadership, it has the borders, it has its institutions, it has the Palestinians in it, and that's what we want.
Okay. There are some Palestinians who are in the other 78% in Israel,
yes.
Right? Are they Israelis or are they Palestinians?
They are Palestinians, but they hold Israeli citizenships.
Okay.
And they are part of the people that have not been, they did not become refugees in 1948, because in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, and they continue to be refugees in neighboring countries and all around the world. And they amount to 8 million today.
Okay. So as we stand today, we have a piece of land that is occupied by Palestinians, and it is now known as the State of Palestine.
Yes.
It has a government.
Yes.
It has structures of government, but that government is not fully internationally recognized.
It is recognized by 160 countries, even countries that have not recognized Palestine as a state yet. They deal with the Palestinian leadership, and that leadership is the legitimate leadership on the 22%, albeit that the 22% is now still occupied by Israel. Large parts of that 22% is occupied by Israel, because that 22% consists of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and occupied East Jerusalem.
Talk to us about why, especially this 22% is important geographically, economically, and why Israel is largely trying to occupy this part of Palestine.
Well, the 22% is enshrined in international law. International law said it very clearly that this is occupied land. We have the ICJ ruling of 2024 that clearly said the 22% is occupied land, and as such, that occupation needs to be dismantled, and it is the responsibility of the world to see the dismantlement of the occupation. It is important because it's part and parcel of the Palestinians' right to self-determination as enshrined in international law, and it's long overdue that the Palestinians rid themselves of this occupation, because no nation, no country would want to be occupied, and you would struggle against that occupation, albeit today the leadership espouses peaceful end of the occupation through negotiations, through compliance with international law, and so forth.
And I'll want to get into exactly that process, but my question was more towards why specifically this 22% is of interest. Is it the most fertile land in Palestine, the most economically viable? Yes.
All of the historic Palestine land is fertile and extremely important. I mean, Palestine is the cradle of Christianity. The Muslims have a lot in it. The Jews have a lot in it. And as such, it is very important for the three monotheistic religions, and it has to be accessible to all. It cannot be exclusive to one while ignoring the others.
Right.
It is important for Palestinians because that's the land that was occupied in 1967, and that's, according to international law, is the state of Palestine today.
Okay. Let's get into now what the last few years have looked like from a human rights perspective for the people of especially Gaza, but Palestinians as a whole. I'll thread, because most people start threading from October 7th, but perhaps you can give us more context than that.
Well, the plight of Palestinians and the sufferings and the pain of Palestinians did not start October 7th. It started long time ago, and you can say it started when the Balfour Declaration was declared, and throughout the partition of Palestine and the 750,000 Palestinians becoming refugees, and facing violations by an occupier for 7 decades today. And the violations come in different shapes and forms. I mean, if you look at the human rights, the list of human rights, I can assure you that as a Palestinian, I have all these rights violated, from my right to mobility, my right to education, my right to healthcare, my right to worship, you name it. And today, these violations have been exacerbated. We have around 10,000 to 11,000 Palestinians in Israeli detention camps. We have illegal Israeli settlers occupying Palestinian land, violating our life day in and day out, uprooting trees, burning cars, burning homes, etc., etc. So we are facing an army, the Israeli occupation army, and we are facing armed Israeli settlers illegally occupying Palestinian land.
I want to get into like the lived realities of a Palestinian. You've said, you know what, all these rights apply to me, all of them are violated. Walk me through the violations of those rights as they happen on the ground from a Palestinian's perspective.
Okay, I'll give you examples. If we talk about your right to mobility, I live in a city called Ramallah, and Ramallah is only 14 kilometers away from Jerusalem. Sometimes it might take a whole day to get there because we are faced with checkpoints. There are 1,200 checkpoints in the 22% of the state of Palestine. And those checkpoints are often closed, or you are sat on those checkpoints for hours before you are allowed movement. I used to work as an academician in a university, and sometimes I would miss classes because you don't know how much you would be spending on those checkpoints, or the humiliations you would get on those checkpoints. Some women gave birth on those checkpoints. Ambulances are impeded from crossing at these checkpoints. So that's one.
What are they checking at the checkpoints?
Well, they want to check sometimes nothing. It's just,
to slow it down.
Yeah, slowing down. Sometimes they're looking at the identity cards to ensure that you have the proper documents. But this is a daily thing. Like if you have a child going to school, that child needs to go through these checkpoints.
Right.
We have a wall, for example. We call it the apartheid wall because it separates Palestinian areas from Israeli areas, sometimes Palestinian areas from Palestinian areas. And that wall is something that when you look at, it gives you goosebumps because it reminds you of so many things that happened elsewhere, but happening today in the 21st century in Palestine. And this wall is, there's a lot of surveillance, and there's no way, it's very difficult to cross throughout the wall. If my
that's
child,
mobility.
That's mobility. Let's look at, for example, healthcare. Today in Gaza, I would say thousands of people were forced into slow death because they couldn't receive healthcare. And they couldn't receive healthcare because Israel did not allow any patients to come out of Gaza, did not allow entry of medication. So if you are a cancer patient with no medication, it means that, slow death.
Yeah.
And this is the indirect death in Gaza throughout the genocide that was taking place in the last 2 years. If you speak about the right to education, I mean, your children are not free to choose to study, for example, abroad. If you cannot travel abroad because you need to get a permission from the Israelis, and if you don't get that permission, you cannot travel. So I can go on and on. But this is the daily life of Palestinians. And let's not forget what is happening to the people in Gaza, or what has happened in the last 2 years, which is so atrocious and so brutal and so incomprehensible that even talking about it is very painful.
The current leadership of the state of Palestine is based in Ramallah, right? That's the headquarters. And you have the president, Mahmoud Abbas, through the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. As Yasser Arafat was actually brought into the world. Now, this current leadership, how did it come into office? How was it elected? And give me the parallels or the linkages between the current leadership, the PLO leadership, and Hamas.
The PLO is the umbrella of all political factions in Palestine. Hamas is not part of the PLO. It has been asked, it has been welcomed to be part of the PLO. But for you to be part of the PLO, you need to subscribe to the mandate of the PLO and accept agreements signed by the PLO and accept the vision the PLO has for the future of Palestine. As such, Hamas is not part of the PLO. The Palestinian Authority came through elections. We had 2 elections since the Palestinian Authority was allowed in the state of Palestine. We had elections in the mid-90s, and then we had elections in 2005, 2006. So we had 2 elections. But ever since, we had no elections. And there's a reason for it, because it was impossible to hold elections on the entirety of occupied Palestine. You cannot have elections without Gaza as part of the elections, and you can't have elections without East Jerusalem. And Israeli authorities will not allow East Jerusalemites to be part of the election process for the Palestinians because they claim that East Jerusalem, although it is occupied and against international law, is part and parcel of the state of Israel today and as unified Jerusalem with West Jerusalem.
Okay. So since that 2005, when you last had an election, you have not had any then, since then. Did the people of East Jerusalem participate in the 2005 election?
Yes, in both elections.
In both elections. Yes. And at what point did Hamas beat the PLO? In the elections
in the
around
second
Gaza?
election. In the second election, Hamas came to power, and then there was the severance of Gaza from the West Bank.
Okay.
And it has continued for 17 years.
So for those 17 years, what has been the relationship between Ramallah and the administration and Hamas administration in Gaza?
Well, in fact, there was what we would call two separate entities, two administrations, which is something we were not happy with, because we were calling for unity the whole time. But unity needs to be based on certain principles, which means you have to come to the core and together decide, and one faction cannot on its own whims decide to sever ties and rule an area with its own rules and regulations. And we continue to say that unity is important because we are looking for one government, one law, one administration, and one weapon for Palestine.
PLO pushes and is advocating for the recognition of the state of Palestine and the creation of the state of Palestine. What is Hamas's position on that?
Hamas, in its modified constitution in 2017, said that it will accept a state of Palestine, but it has certain issues that need to be dealt with. The state of Palestine is already established. So what we are trying to do now is materializing that state, taking it from where it is right now, under occupation, to a full sovereign, independent state.
Okay.
And there's a momentum on that.
You said for Hamas it was they will accept. What was their ideal?
Well, that wasn't further elaborated, but at least the position was better than the position in the first constitution and the mandate. So we hope that we come to terms to accept the fact that the state of Palestine today is on the 22%, and that 22% needs to get rid itself from the occupation.
Is that that consensus, does that exist between the PLO and Hamas, that the state of Palestine sits within that 22%?
That consensus is within the PLO.
Okay.
And the PLO, as I said, is the umbrella of all factions.
Yes.
Now, if Hamas wants to be part of the PLO and part of the political structure of the state of Palestine as one state, encompassing the entirety of the occupied state of Palestine, then it needs to subscribe to the two states.
To the two-state solution.
Yes.
Okay.
So what kind of response and pushback do you get from the international community in this realization of the state of Palestine as an independent, self-governing entity?
I think today there's a big momentum towards the realization of the two states. We had a wave of recognitions in the last 2 years, almost 20 countries recognized, and we need to keep that momentum. We still have some 34 countries that must recognize, and if any country says that it complies with international law, it believes in the rights of people to self-determination, then they should come forward, because international law applies to everybody, including the Palestinians. We also have a big move on what is called the Global Alliance on the materialization of the two states. And we have EU countries in that. We have Saudi Arabia, we have Norway that are spearheading that process. And that process feeds into what is called the New York Declaration. The New York Declaration came about 2 months ago in New York. That declaration was spearheaded by Saudi Arabia and France, alongside most countries of the world, and came up with a declaration of 42 points that clearly delineated what needs to be done and commitments needed from different countries of the world so that they move Palestine from where it is today to independence. And it includes issues on the war on Gaza, the economy in Palestine, changing the narrative, etc., etc. So that is an excellent document that we are trying to highlight and keep in mind wherever we go, so that we see that whoever committed and signed that declaration is following through with the commitments in that declaration.
Who are the biggest opponents to that declaration?
The ones who have not signed it yet. And the ones who have, yes. Well, I mean, the United States did not sign it. Other countries did not sign it, but most countries signed it. Even countries, some countries that have not yet recognized Palestine signed it. For example, Italy does not recognize Palestine yet, but it signed it. Because some of the countries that have not recognized are not against the two states. They are for the two states. But what they are telling us is that that needs a process. That needs a political process. What we are telling the world is when Palestine accepted the two-state solution and went into a peace process with Israel in the mid-90s, it said two states, and in few years we will achieve that. But we are 35 years from that agreement, and what we have seen is emboldening of the occupation and strengthening that occupation.
From your experience in diplomacy, in politics and global politics, who needs to sign this agreement for it to gain momentum?
The New York Declaration?
Yes.
I think, look, today, the United States is a big player. It's a big stakeholder, and it's a maker. So we need to, as much as possible, get to the table of the US administration, get to the ears of President Trump, and say that the two-state solution is the only viable solution for ending the conflict and ending the occupation. There is no other solution.
Right. Is there any other country that sits on the UN Security Council that didn't sign the New York Declaration?
All of them have signed.
Except from the United States?
Yes.
Okay. That brings into context several things. When we come back, I'll want to talk about the declaration, yes, if there's been any progress, and then international law and how enforceable it is, because we've seen, a lack of that. But we're taking a short break. I can see your feedback coming in. Questions on when was Palestine made a state, etc., things like that, which we'll all come back to answer. But we'll take a short break. Hashtag is Fixing the Nation NTV.
She is our guest this morning. She is the Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Minister for the State of Palestine, Dr. Varsen Aghabekian Shahin. And we're talking about the State of Palestine and where it is right now in terms of looking at the global politics and what has been happening in the last 2 years, especially in Gaza, with the attacks from Israel. Then the global effort and the global effort to bring peace towards this. But there's a bigger story that has been happening for the last 70 years, which is, where is the second state of Palestine? Does it actually exist? And is it fully recognized, like Kenya is recognized? Is the state of Palestine the same as the Republic of Kenya?
There's a lot. Wow, that bigger story, and that's a thread that's important. We should have gotten some graphics actually to see the map over the years from 1945, 1948, over the years, how different parts of Palestine have been annexed and occupied by Israel. But I want to talk about international law now and what role it plays in getting us a two-state solution, but also how it's ignored. And it's something we've also spoken about on this show a few times. A few instances of, ignoring human rights and also declarations, international declarations. When South Africa filed a case against Israel for the genocide under the Genocide Convention, actually, the ICJ issued an order indicating provisional measures to prevent acts of genocide. That was largely ignored. Same thing to violations of international laws, for example, attacks on hospitals, medical facilities, I think water facilities as well. The restriction of humanitarian aid, again, also attacks on people providing aid. Those are all either violations of international law, of treaties, or ignoring the International Court of Justice. But still, we are pushing for this under international law. How do those two things hold water?
You're right. There were several issues that were ignored by international law, and we see the double standard because international law must not be divisible. If it applies in Europe, it applies in Israel-Palestine. And we need to continue pushing for international law, because if it's not international law, then what? I mean, international law was created for a purpose. And that purpose is to ensure that whatever happened in World War II is not repeated, never again. But we see aspects of that repeated in Israel, Palestine, and elsewhere in the world. But we need to continue saying that that international law exists, and we all, as freedom-loving people, as people who comply with law, must go by international law, albeit it is not applied equally.
So that's the thing I was just going to say. Sometimes the thing with international law is it seems it only applies to, for example, the third world. I don't know,
Yes.
you know, Africa, sometimes Asia, Latin America, etc. And then elsewhere, you pick and choose when to apply it. What are the ways to actually even that playing field and make sure that it's applied equally across the board?
We need to continue hammering the world to say that international law is indivisible, and everybody needs to comply with international law, because otherwise it will be the law of power, and whoever has the power will dictate. And I don't think today, in this day and age, we would want to go into that corner.
What does the international law say about aggression? When one country has been invaded or aggressed, or law has been violated, what is the responsibility of that country, the victim country?
The victim country,
under international law.
Look, there is the victim and there is the perpetrator of the aggression.
Yeah.
If we look at Israel-Palestine, Palestinians are the victims and the perpetrators of occupation are the Israelis. Under international law, Israel has obligations on treating occupied Palestinians, and it doesn't follow these obligations. I mean, it has obligations for detaining people. It has obligations on not transferring its own people to occupied land. International law, the Geneva Conventions say clearly, you cannot transfer people, you cannot change the geography or the demography of occupied land. But Israel has done so ever since it occupied in 1967 the rest of historic Palestine. It brought in illegal Israeli settlers and settled them in stolen occupied land. It has been annexing part of the Palestinian occupied land, and all of this is against international law.
What is the responsibility of the government of the state of Palestine?
The responsibility of the government is to ensure that it highlights and it continues highlighting these violations to the world, and it continues hammering the world using international and multilateral mechanisms. We have the ICJ, the ICC, the Human Rights Council, the United Nations, to ensure that we rally as much support as possible on the issue of the liberation of Palestine.
So, are we saying that international law expects the victim government to only come and raise an issue and then try and rally support while the aggressor continues to do what they're doing?
Well, this is the case today, because at the UN we have about 1,000 resolutions, whether at the General Assembly or the Security Council, that look positively in terms of the plight of the Palestinians, and none was complied with, not one resolution. That's why today the New York Declaration is probably saying enough is enough. And today the world needs to say it loud. This is an occupation that is illegal. If Israel wants to continue as a normal state in the region and be accepted in the region, and we would want it to be accepted in the region, but for it to be accepted in the region, it has to act normal, as a normal state. Normal states don't occupy their neighbors. Normal states does not wage a genocidal war on its neighbors. It does not violate their rights on a daily basis. It doesn't kill, it doesn't uproot trees, it respects international law. And as such, Israel needs to comply. If it doesn't, the Palestinians will continue struggling against occupation. People opt to struggle either violently or non-violently. The official position is we want to solve this non-violently.
Yeah.
We don't want to go into a field confrontation, because that field confrontation, we don't believe will get us where we are. It will be more painful.
Is that, sorry. I was going to ask if that's Hamas's position as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that Hamas's position as well?
Well, Hamas's position was clear. I mean, Hamas had October 7th.
Yeah.
And the October 7th was violent. Of course it was violent. But it has to be seen in a context of decades of violence by an occupier. Okay, it's October 7th was violent, but the response was way disproportional. I mean, you don't respond with killing 70,000 people, injuring 180,000. We have over 10,000 under the rubble, erasing 90% of the infrastructure, killing everything that is needed for a viable life in Gaza. That's not a response.
Madam Wazir, if you look at the number of years that the people of Palestine have pushed and advocated for the state of Palestine to be an independent state, and the kind of response that you've received from your friends in the international community, do you read duplicity? People who will, you know, in some instances support you, but they don't recognize the state of Palestine, or those that recognize the state of Palestine, but they will do nothing against any further occupation or expansion of occupation.
Well, this was a case. I mean, this was a case years ago, but today we see a momentum, a different momentum. Today, the world is looking at the area and seeing the necessity for reaching the two-state solution, because maintaining the status quo is impossible. I mean, you cannot have people under occupation forever, because these people will continue rising against occupation. And Israel cannot continue with its wrongdoing by occupying another nation forever. And if the two countries want to live in safety and security with friendly relations, then the rights of the Palestinians need to be respected. And many countries have come to terms with that and are pushing for the two states.
But in truth, there have been moments of such momentum, even in the past. Momentum in the 90s when the deal was signed, some momentum. If you look at the Accord of 67, some momentum. But then those momentums go and they fade. What needs to happen this time for this momentum not to fade?
This needs to be pushed as much as possible, because this is the time. If not now, the cycle of violence that we have witnessed in the last 2 years will come back to haunt us. Because people of Palestine cannot live forever under this occupation and cannot fathom what they have witnessed in the last 2 years. I mean, the brutality that was exercised on the Palestinian people is something that cannot be accepted anywhere in the world, and we see an awakening in the world in that regard. I mean, even if you look at Jews in the United States, they're coming forward and saying, not in my name, and no more as an occupier state. So I think we're in the direction of doing something soon.
And something final. I'm thinking through what could be different between now and those previous pushes and attempts. And for me, social media stands out huge, like largely. And I think it's the power of social media in changing narratives. I think global narratives have been, very much focused on one thing and telling one side of the story, which has shaped how people think and how nations think and how they react. But now, to be able to see, unfortunately, to be able to see a genocide taking place in real time, it's quite painful, but it does something for the mind. Also changing the narratives around having, speaking out against a genocidal, government isn't anti-Semitic. Being able to separate those two things, I think those are very important. Do you think, without those things, we'd have been able to get to this point? And what are some of the biggest changes we've seen in how countries and people especially relate with the issues of Palestinians with social media now?
You're very right. Social media helped a lot. And with social media, you can reach. The reach is, the sky is the limit. And people have seen it developing. I mean, they've seen everything in their own eyes. It's not like reading about it. They've seen it. You cannot erase it. People will continue remembering it, and it will go in history as one of the darkest moments in this day and age. We see what is happening with the youth around the world. We see what is happening with institutions, with organizations, hospitals, universities, etc. And we believe that social media had a lot to do with that. And we will continue using social media, and we would encourage people to continue.
I'm thinking through, again, some of the allies of Palestine when it comes to international diplomacy, South Africa being perhaps the loudest one and one of the biggest ones.
Yes.
I know there's others, but on the continent, I think for a country that, may not be rated that highly sometimes by the international community, you know, to come out and go into the International Court of Justice, I think that's a big deal.
Yes.
What do you think is the difference between, for example, how South Africa views this and how other places in the West who are much closer to this view this?
Look, we much appreciate what South Africa did. I think it had done us a big favor, and it continues to do so. But South Africa understands the plight of the Palestinians. I mean, people that have been occupied, people that have suffered, people that have struggled for their liberation would understand very well the plight of the Palestinians. And it's much easier to stand with the right of the oppressed people. And as such, we look at the whole world and say, whether oppressed, not oppressed, you need to look at what is right. Today, if you speak against Israel or the wrongdoings of Israel, that should not be considered anti-Semitic. Because if any other country was doing what Israel is doing, you would tell that country that what you're doing is wrongdoing, and that wouldn't be anti-Semitic. So why would it be anti-Semitic when it comes to Israel? Wrongdoing is wrongdoing. Compliance with international law is a must, and it's an obligation by all states.
I think a lot of countries have been, occupied before. Kenya was a colony, but for some reason we didn't do that. We didn't take Israel to the International Court of Justice. If anything, there's a particular vote where we abstained, and I think that was quite shameful. But I'm trying to see, is it how recent it was? Because for them, I think gaining independence in 1994, so it's not a previous generation or an older generation that knows this. It's people in their 20s, in their 30s actually, who remember. Do you think that?
But generally speaking, Kenya's voting record is positive. I mean, once in a while we monitor voting records and we see that one slips. But generally speaking, African countries have been positive when it comes to Israel-Palestine. But we also understand there are interests for countries. And we know that many African countries are friends with Israel. We want them to continue being friends with Israel. We have no problem with that. But as friends, you need to tell Israel that to maintain this friendship, you have to be a normal state that does not occupy other people.
Do you sometimes, after vote, have conversations as foreign minister with your counterparts in some of these countries, or ahead of the vote, using also your ambassadors in New York? Do you have conversations with these states to understand their thinking in the way they are voting?
Of course.
Of course. And what do you see? What do you hear?
Well, we hear, the interests of countries. I mean, you have laborers in Israel, you have trade with Israel, you have influence of other countries working in Kenya, for example. So there are multiple factors that influence a voting pattern. But generally speaking, the voting has been positive.
There's a question from one of our fixers online, MSK 1690, who is asking a question that I want to give a bit of context. In 1995, the US Congress passed a law called the Jerusalem Embassy Act that was requiring that the embassy of the USA be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And presidents since then, up to 2017, were giving every 6 months, every waiver, every month, every time a waiver, not to move it. Donald Trump, 2018, says we are moving to Jerusalem. Did that have any impact on the push by Palestine?
Look, that move is illegal. I mean, East Jerusalem is occupied. Under international law, it's occupied, and it's part and parcel of the Palestinian territory occupied in 1967. And as such, any move is illegal. So that's how we look at it as Palestinians. Now it's a fact on the ground. The American embassy has been moved, but we will continue to say that this move is illegal. And whenever there is an agreement on the state of Palestine and East Jerusalem becomes part of the state of Palestine, another arrangement needs to be found.
So let me get what is illegal here. The move to the US embassy here is illegal, but it's preceded by the thought here is that there's a recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Well, right? Again.
So that is what you're saying, that
and
recognition
that's illegal.
is illegal. You do not want any country to recognize Jerusalem
East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem.
Or unified Jerusalem. You see, they look at it as Jerusalem.
Yes. West Jerusalem was not occupied in 1967. Right. East Jerusalem was occupied. Israel is saying West and East Jerusalem are unified and are part of Israel, and it is the capital of Israel. You cannot annex an occupied part and call it your capital.
What are you prepared to do as foreign minister?
Wait, as it stands, sorry, just before we go to what you're prepared to do, as it stands, break down who is where in Jerusalem.
In East Jerusalem, Palestinian Arabs, Christians and Muslims live in East Jerusalem. We have also Israeli settlers living in East Jerusalem that have settled after 1967. And East Jerusalem was expanded by the municipality, the Jerusalem municipality, or the Israeli municipality. On the eve of occupation, it was less than 7 square kilometers. It was expanded to 70 kilometers. It was expanded to 97, to 128, and today they're talking about Greater Jerusalem, which is 250 square kilometers. So the more you expand, the more you can claim it's part and parcel of a unified Jerusalem. But all of it is illegal.
And the importance of Jerusalem as I would say a spiritual, for multiple religions, for 3 religions actually. I will get into that, but Eric, please ask your question.
Now, I was actually just moving on to what you're prepared to do as foreign minister. Now, here you are. You've got the New York Declaration, you've got the previous accords that have been signed, not fully implemented. You have all these conversations. You are the one in the driving seat now as the foreign minister of the Palestinian people. What are you prepared to do to have this momentum go? What are you not prepared to cede?
We're prepared to take it all the way. And this is not just the responsibility of the Palestinian people, it's the responsibility of the world. The world created the state of Israel and set 2 states. Now is the time for materializing the second state. The world has been watching what the state of Israel as an occupier state has been doing for the last 7 decades. And it has emboldened it, it has supported it. And Israel continued with whatever it was doing with impunity for a very long time. Now it is the time to put measures, hold Israel to account, and say we will apply whatever the obligations are of an occupier state.
Okay, and what is that?
The obligations are to end the occupation, period.
What are you not prepared to cede?
We have made the biggest concession as Palestinians. We have conceded to 78% of historic Palestine. And we have recognized Israel to sit on that 78%. The 22% is non-negotiable. We are ready for the sake of peace. Once we are recognized by Israel as the state on the 22%, to sit and talk about minor border modifications, swapping lands of equal value and size for the sake of peace, but not before the full recognition.
Do you think this push by PLO to actually now go the peaceful route has killed the momentum of the last 30 years? The PLO of the 70s and 80s and the push that it had, and then the PLO that said, let's seek a peaceful resolution of this issue. Do you think this peace has actually made you weaker?
Look, it's not black and white. Before 1988, before saying, we recognize the state Israel and we want to go the peaceful route, we were called a terrorist organization by many countries. Okay, we pushed back from that, and we said the nonviolent way. We went into a peace process. That peace process today did not bring us what we were aspiring to. What we need to put the world to account today is to say, it is your responsibility to support us, to ensure that we get where we are. And as I said, without ending occupation, there is no peace in the area. There is no peace for the Palestinians, nor the Israelis, nor the region, and probably not to the world. Because that area specifically is a destabilizing factor for the whole area. And we should all together push for that aspired peace.
Okay. I want to get into 2 things. One being, what is an ideal Jerusalem that respects that it is a holy place for three of the world's biggest religions, that is also peaceful?
The Palestinians have put several scenarios on the table for the negotiators, and we said we can have a unified Jerusalem, where West Jerusalem would be the capital of Israel, East Jerusalem would be the capital of Palestine. We can have a closed city. If they want, we can have a wall between the two. We can have an open city where, you know, we can enjoy both parts. We're open. It's the Israelis that are not entertaining any solution. But for me, it's important that we have Jerusalem as a space where we all enjoy, whether we're Muslims, Christians, or Jews. That should be accessible to all and not only for a specific religion. Today, there are Judaization measures in East Jerusalem, and many of us, Christians and Muslims, have no access to Jerusalem. So our right to worship is undermined, because I can assure you there are people who are 45 years old, 40 years of age, who have never been to Jerusalem, even though they live 10 kilometers away from Jerusalem.
Thinking through where we are at right now, as far as this peace brokered by the US, what next, actually?
This peace brokered by the US was very important, but it should be seen as a prelude to something much bigger. Because peace in Palestine means peace for the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And it doesn't only mean peace for a specific part. Albeit it's important because it has stopped the massive killing and the bleeding of the Palestinian people. But we need to tie it to international law. We need to tie it to the right of self-determination for the Palestinians. We need to tie it to the New York Declaration. We need to tie it to previous resolutions on Israel-Palestine. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard. But now we have completed the first step, which is the release of all the hostages. Now we need to embark on the second step.
What's the second step?
An international stabilization force being put in place to ensure that there's peace and security. The Board of Peace to be instituted. That Board of Peace will have an international executive committee, and from that international executive committee you will have a technocrat committee that will do the day-to-day work. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's the urgency, of course, because people are suffering. Today people have nothing in Gaza.
Thank you very much, Waziri, for joining us. Dr. Varsen Aghabekian Shahin is the Minister for Foreign and Expatriate Affairs of Palestine. And actually, as we conclude, how many Palestinians are in Palestine? And how many Palestinians are expatriate?
About 8 million Palestinians who were refugees, descendants of refugees, but we have over 11 million probably Palestinians abroad, and we have some 5.5 million Palestinians inside.
At home. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you for joining us today. She's around for the UNEA conference,
yes,
right? Attending the United Nations Environment Assembly. And thank you for having a conversation with us. Keep it here for our next conversation, which will come back into the country, and we'll look at the growth of the MSME sector and what KCB Foundation is doing over that. Back in a moment.